You know, you can't force people, if you think about it, Steve, to do something that even they can kind of calculate with rough math on the back of a napkin doesn't add up. What do you think of this?
Well, I listened to that report, and I can't tell you how frustrated I am, because a good tax system, Neil, has a broad tax base and low tax rates. And what's happened under Biden is we're moving in the opposite direction. They want to raise the rates and create all of these loopholes in the tax system. Am I in favor of people weatherizing their house? Sure. Yeah, good idea. But I don't know why the taxpayer should have to pay for that in the form of a drained revenue to the federal government. So I don't like this stuff. I mean, I think weatherization is fine, but all these credits and loopholes and special interest privileges in the tax code, they make it a mess. And by the way, it makes it much more complicated to, you know, I'm a Steve Forbes guy. Why don't we have a flat tax? Get rid of all this stuff.
No, that is something he champions all the time. The more complicated our code gets, you'd think that's more the direction we move, but actually we get more complicated. But let me ask you, Steve, about this environment right now. I know the president likes to brag that he doesn't look at the stock market, that he felt that your old boss, Donald Trump, over-obsessed about it, and he chose not to. Now and then, you know, I always tell presidents of all different stripes, it might be a good idea to just take a peek now and then. And as you've discovered, for a lot of folks, they're not too happy. Explain.
Well, I agree that the president should not be completely obsessed with the changes day to day from the stock market. You know, I agree with that. But I do think they should be focused on our fiscal deficit. I think they should be focused on inflation. I think they should be focused on what's happening with real wages. And those things, I think, are headed right now in the wrong direction. And, you know, look, the president doesn't have any kind of direct control over the stock market whatsoever. But he can control what's happening with money supply. He can control what's happening with this legislation. It's no accident that energy prices have gone up a lot under Biden's presidency, because there's been a kind of war against American energy, oil, gas, and coal, and that drives up prices. So I want him to be focused on the things he can influence.
So when the president ignores this and looks at the markets as a haven for fat cats, the reality is with people with 401ks and even those who have pension funds directly or indirectly invested in stocks, they've been losing it. Their paper wealth has deteriorated.
You got it. Now, look, the last couple of days have seen a little bit of a recovery in those really bad numbers. But, yeah, the average 401k plan has lost about $34,000. By the way, let's say you're someone who's saved up, let's say $250,000 to $300,000, which really isn't all that much, you know, given that maybe you're 60 to 65 years old, as I am. Now you've lost about $50,000 in your 401k plan because you got to take into account inflation. And Neil, for a lot of people, that's a down payment on a retirement home, you know, in Arizona or South Carolina or Florida. So this is depleting people's savings, and that's why I would make the case to you that the people who are hammered the hardest by inflation are senior citizens, because they've spent their whole life building up their savings, and then their savings gets vaporized by that high inflation.
Now, I understand, as you touched on it, this notion that you don't want to, as a president, you know, deal or designate everything you do based on how the stock market's going to react. That can be very risky because the market can surprise you. Having said that, though, there does seem to be very little in the offing here as far as expanded energy production or the prospect of anything resembling tax relief. And I'm wondering if that is putting a lid on the type of gains that we could be getting.
Yeah, you know, I don't want to be excessively political. I'm not a rah-rah Republican by any means. Republicans are part of the problem, too. But I do think, here's something to think about in terms of the medium term. The worst scenario for the stock market over the last 60 or 70 years, you know these numbers, Neil, has been when one party controls everything. Right. The House, the Senate, and the presidency. We are going to get a change election. The House is 95% certain going to go Republican. I don't know what's going to happen with the Senate. Right. But I think that change in the political formation is going to force Biden, hopefully, to maybe move more to the middle. Maybe we can get some of these things that need to be done, like a more rational energy policy.
But do you worry, Steve, do you worry in saying that Republicans have the onus of saying what they're going to do? And they have already outlined they want to make permanent the president's tax cuts and all of that stuff. I get that, and we're showing some of the top worries for voters of all sorts. But England maybe proves, and you know what we're seeing out of Liz Truss, and she's maybe on borrowed time. She had to shelve these planned tax cuts for corporations and the well-to-do, actually across the board, because the markets revolted. And you think about that, the markets are saying you haven't paid for these. I wonder if that could be a preview of coming attraction, what Republicans might have to endure if their tax cuts, if their plans aren't paid for.
Well, look, I think the reason that the British stock market and the British economy has imploded has been really out of control government spending. Yes. And so I think the message, I hope the message from what has happened in Britain is not don't cut taxes, but you've got to bring spending down. I've talked to both, Mitch McConnell, and I've talked to Steve Scalise about this. You got to, I think job number one for the Republicans, if they do take the House and or Senate, they've got to get the spending down. I don't care how many times the Fed raises interest rates. If you've got $4 trillion sloshing around out there because of all this excessive spending, you're going to see high inflation. You've got, I think, job number one, you've got to take an axe to this budget, and let's get back somewhere at least near a balanced budget.
All right, and then all of a sudden you woke up. But no, Steve, I'm kidding. I'm just kidding.
Come on, Neil.
No, you're right. You cut to the core.
Hey, wait, I got to tell you one thing quick on the out. Okay, I remember when Newt Gingrich, when he became Speaker, remember that, in 1995, and I remember I was at the meeting, he said, we're going to balance the budget in 5 years, and half of the Republican caucus fell off their chairs. This can never happen. And you know what? You got to give credit to Newt and Clinton and the Republicans. We actually balanced the budget in 3 years. This can happen. You got to have economic growth,
and you got both sides to work together to make it happen.
Go.
And if you don't do that, it doesn't happen.
Exactly.
Steve, you have a future in this money thing. Keep pursuing it. It looks promising.
Okay.
Always good seeing it.